Whoa boy, has this video been a long time coming. So recently I have been deep in my nostalgia area, like 3 years deep in my nostalgia area, and while watching shows from my childhood, because let's be real, they hit harder as the older you get. I don't make the rules, I just follow them. In my nostalgia rewatches, I rewatched Digimon and Digimon Frontier, and while watching Digimon Frontier, I rediscovered my love for this lovely lady right here. This is Zephyrmon. Is it crazy that that is a child? Absolutely. That is a conversation for another time. In the meantime, look at her. When I rediscovered this Digimon, I absolutely knew that I had to recreate her, and that is what this video is all about. But before we hop into it, hello, my name is Morgan. I make everything cosplay and crafty over on this channel, and if that sounds interesting to you, please feel free to hop on that subscribe button. I would love if you followed me on this cosplay journey. I also want to warn that this footage is actually 2 years old, so it might be a little bit jarring between these talking heads sections and the filming of the progress sections because they were filmed on 2 different cameras 2 years apart. So just be warned about that. And without further ado, let's go ahead and hop in with the first thing I made, which was the scarf. I started out by measuring my neck to see how high I wanted the part of the scarf that wraps around my neck to sit. And then I was able to transfer that over to some 3mm EVA foam. I also took the measurements to see how long it would need to be to fully wrap around my face and sit comfortably. Honestly, these measurements were super rough, and I actually made it a little bit longer just so I had a little bit of wiggle room. And as my guesstimations usually go, it was way too big, but I was able to fold it down and find the right size. Okay, so I just wanted to talk and explain a little bit what I did. So I didn't like how bulky it was sitting on my shoulders, so I kind of tapered in the edges a little bit so that it'll rest on my shoulders a bit better, because with it being fully straight around, it was sitting way too high on my face. So now it kind of sits a lot better on my shoulders. Let me see if I can show you guys. There, now it sits like it should. So this is the shape we're gonna go forward with. I'll be able to reuse the scraps that I cut off of this, the strips for the buckles later. Hopefully the buckles that I already have in my stash will work, but for now we're going to use this foam piece to pattern out the fabric. So yeah, let's start. For this, I used the foam piece that I had just cut out and directly traced it onto my fabric with my tailor's chalk. Once I had both pieces traced out, I was able to cut them both out with seam allowance. Okay, so I've cut out the front and the back pieces. I don't know if you can see here, but I have extended the one of the sides by a little bit because I plan on connecting this in the back with Velcro, and that will eventually be hidden by the long tail part of the scarf. But before I can sew these together, I need to make the straps that buckle around the front of the scarf, and I've decided to use some of this fabric. I ordered way too much when I made my Storm cosplay because I was in a time crunch and I got scared, so I ordered more than I needed. So I'm going to use this. I think it has a good contrast with the texture. And I also have some buckles in my stash that I'll be able to use that I think will fit on this pretty nicely. And then I'm going to top stitch those straps down to the actual fabric itself before I stitch around this to make a casing for the foam. So that's the next plan. I kind of paused for a bit because I wasn't sure how I wanted to tackle the tail of the scarf. I wasn't sure if I wanted to make it attached to the main body of the scarf, but I've come to the conclusion that I think it's just going to be easier for it to be detachable. That way it can cover the seam in the back of the main part of the scarf that goes around the neck, where the Velcro sits. So that is the plan. I'm gonna get to sewing those straps now. Like I had said previously, I went ahead and used the excess material that I cut off the main scarf piece for the straps. I made them 1 inch wide so that they would be able to fit inside the buckles that I had in my stash. I also make sure to make them a little bit longer than the actual scarf piece itself. Because these are made out of foam and foam has thickness, you have to take that into consideration when you're wrapping things, because two pieces of the same size with thick foam are not going to be the same flush once you wrap them around. I'm probably not explaining this to best, but there is a content creator out here who has made a tutorial or a talk about this, and I will try to include that down below. Since I wanted these straps to come together and buckle in the middle, I needed to make an opposite side so that would be able to happen. Once I had those cut out, I was able to round them out so it looked a little bit more like a belt, and then I contact cemented those to the fabric that I chose. I then used a wrapping method to fold over all of the excess seam allowance to the back. I decided to go this route because you're not going to be able to see the back of these straps once it is attached to the main piece of the scarf. I then installed the buckle to the non-rounded side of the strap. I only used hot glue for this because I knew I was going to be hand tacking these down and it would eventually secure it later with that, so I wasn't too worried. Okay, so this is what we're working with. I didn't really film the sewing process. I was having a bit of trouble getting these straps sewn onto the case itself, but what I ended up doing was sewing the two sides of the straps to the front panel of the outer fabric and then sew the casing, leaving one side open. You can see I have it closed off with clips right now. And then I stuck the foam inside, and I had to do a lot of adjusting originally. I had these, the loops on like the second to last hole. Yeah, in the second to last hole. And it just like was not fitting. The foam was getting really crunched up. So I'm thankful that I made extra holes because now it's on the very last one and it actually fits. And I still think it looks okay. I can show you guys what it looks like on. Oh, I also went ahead and added the strap or flap, I guess is a better word, for the Velcro. So I have to sew the Velcro on this side and this side so that it'll close in the back. But essentially, this is what it looks like. The belts are still loose, so they're not in place where they should be, but I'm gonna hand sew those down as well as hand sew these little flappy doos down. But yeah, and that will be the first part, like the top part of the scarf done, and then I can move on to the little tail thing. Hello, good morning. Excuse my voice. This is the first time I'm talking today. It's the next day. I gotta squat. I didn't want to re-angle my camera. This is what we got done yesterday. I just spent time tacking down the straps as well as hand sewing the Velcro in, so now it has closure. I think it looks pretty good so far. Next will be the, don't fall. Next will be the like tail part of the scarf. And I'm wearing my Samurai Jack shirt, so you know that I mean business. So yeah, let's get into it. This was all the foam I had left, so I really had to work with the measurements that were available to me. I decided to go with a taper, starting smaller at the neck and getting wider as it flared out at the bottom. And for this, I literally just eyeballed it. The only thing I was sure to measure was that the sides were evenly distanced apart from the center seam. So you can see I have a center line going all the way through, and as I added length to one side, I wanted to make sure that the length was the same distance away on the other side. To make this easier and make sure that it's actually symmetrical, you could also pattern this out by just folding a piece of paper in half and drawing one side of your pattern, and when you cut it out, it will be symmetrical on both sides when you open it back up. This is what the tail was looking like once I had it cut out, but I realized that it was sitting a little too short on me, so I went ahead and cut out another small piece of foam and just glued those edges together with contact cement. The additional piece added, it was hitting right about my knees, and that was the perfect length. Now that the internal foam structure is to my liking, I went ahead and traced it out onto the pleather just like I did with the top part of this. This time, however, I made sure to fold the fabric in half with the right side of the fabric facing on the inside so that I would have two sides when I cut it out. This would make it a lot easier for me down the line when I was ready to sew. After doing a test fit with the casing, I realized that the tail of the scarf was looking a little bit more floppy than I wanted, so I decided to add a wire framing to the outside. I just did this by measuring out the wire, cutting it to size, and then using leftover strips from the material that I was using for the scarf itself. I glued that in place. Once that was done, I was able to slide the foam back into the fabric casing and sew that up with a whip stitch at the top. I forgot to film it, but to attach this part of the scarf to the main body that would go around my neck, I only was sure to attach it to one side and then Velcro to the other side. That way I would still be able to get the flap on and off in the back. Zephyrmon scarf also has these weird looking bolts that sit on the very tip of her scarf on the top and the bottom. And I realized that my tiny contact cement can was the perfect size for this, so I used that to trace out two circles. In order to bulk out the dome shape for these bolts, I went ahead and took some old scrap throwaway ad newspaper and crumpled that up in the middle and secured it with hot glue. And then on top of that, I went ahead and added some foam clay. You want to make sure to let your foam clay dry for about 24 hours, and then once it's all dry, I hit it with some Plasti Dip for priming, silver spray paint, and then I did a little bit of detail weathering with some black acrylic paint. To secure the bolts to the scarf, I went ahead and marked out a spot using the exact same can that I used for making them, filled in that circle with contact cement. Once both sides were dry, I was able to attach those together. For those of you who don't know, contact cement dries on contact, meaning you have to paint both sides that you would plan to adhere together, let them get kind of tacky, and then you can stick them together. So in my almost 10 years of cosplay, I have made a handful of wings, but nothing quite this big. So my original plan did not work the way that I wanted it to. Originally, I was going to do a simple wire frame that fed into a backplate, and that way, because the wire is fairly thin, it would be fairly discreet. I learned throughout my process that the wire was not going to be strong enough to hold up the foam and all of those feathers that were going to go on the wings, so I had to pivot. Zephyrmon's wings are insanely huge, so in order to get a piece of paper for a pattern big enough, I ended up having to tape together a bunch of old newspaper. After that, I roughly sketched out the main body of the wings. If you're able to, I highly recommend taping your pattern onto the wall so you can get a clear vision of what it'll look like in proportion to your body. You can also do this laying down and have somebody take a picture of you. Once I had the size and shape of the wings the way I like, I went ahead and transferred that over onto some 3mm EVA foam. The foam sheets I had weren't quite wide enough, so I ended up having to cut the tips out separately and glue those together the same way I did to extend the scarf. From here, I was able to start working on the internal structure of the wings that would hold them up, and for this, I decided to go the route of flattening PVC pipe. This would give me the sturdy structure I need, but by flattening it, it would also keep it more discreet. I also did this to the piece that would eventually attach to the back plate. This is also a reminder that heating up PVC is extremely toxic, so make sure you're taking precautions and you're wearing your PPE. During the time of filming this, I actually lived in quite a small apartment, but I still made sure to keep 4 fans going, all the windows open, and wearing my respirator, and I kept my respirator on for at least 30 minutes after to make sure the fumes were cleared out. Hello, hi. I didn't want to take the camera off the tripod to explain this real quick, but I just wanted to kind of talk through what I'm doing because I'm kind of figuring it out as I go. So, hey. So I've made a wire frame that kind of fits the shape. I need to bend it a little bit better to fit the actual shape of the foam wing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna like tape it around the edges because glue is a hassle. And then you saw me flatten the PVC pipe, and that is just gonna go at the top of the wing. And I think I'm also gonna tape this down and then probably do some extra securing with some EVA foam strips, just kind of looping from front to back along this piece. and this will hopefully hold the majority of the weight. It shouldn't be too heavy, it's just foam, but I'm hoping that this will hold the majority of the weight, and then the wire frame structure will just keep the keep it from like not flapping around as much. That is the plan. So I'm gonna get to doing that while I continue watching Digimon. Moving on to the back plate, I made this out of ABS plastic. This is a type of plastic sheeting that can be heated up and made moldable, but it's not the same as a thermoplastic like Warbla. It doesn't give as much give or flexibility, and it doesn't have any adhesive on it. But I decided to go with it because it's incredibly sturdy. I drilled 4 holes into the 2 smaller pieces of flattened PVC that would be attached to the back plate. I attached these with nuts and bolts of the right size and shape through corresponding holes that were also drilled into the back plate itself. To finish the back plate off, I marked where I wanted the straps to sit and then burned the holes or melted the holes in with my soldering iron. This is another warning to make sure you are using your PPE. ABS plastic is also quite toxic. And please ignore the brackets that are on there. I filmed this before I had to change my plan. Here they are. They work. This wasn't my first idea, but I'm glad that I had the PVC in my stash. The only thing is the wings kind of like sit and touch inward here on the back. So what I think I want to do is get some like 45-degree angle joints where these connect. And that way that'll lift them up a little bit higher, so they'll sit a little bit higher on my body, and also they'll space out in the back here. If not, I might have to take some material out from here and kind of redo the wire a little bit. But I'm really happy with how these come out. They're super lightweight. I put on a crop top to see exactly where the buckle would sit. And I think it will work. The only thing I'm scared about is the top with these straps peeking out. But we have wings! For some reason, there was a theme with these wings. The head wings also had to be readjusted in my plan. Originally, I was going to do a foam core and then cover the foam core with feathers just like I did with the back wings. However, I realized quickly that trying to put those real feathers on there was going to be way too much time, especially if I was going to try and shape them and make them look like actual wings instead of just a bunch of feathers piled on. So again, I had to pivot. Please excuse my voice, my allergies are kicking my butt. But I realized that my initial plan for the head wings was not going to work. So originally, I had these base foam pieces with the screws in them, and I was going to just layer the feathers that I bought to match the wig on top of the foam. But the feathers were just giving me way too many problems, and I was gonna have to cut them and reshape them to get them the way that I wanted. So instead of doing that, I drafted out a pattern of how I want the wings to look and counted out how many feathers I'll need. And then I patterned out some base feathers forms here of large, medium, small, medium, and small. So I'm going to copy these onto foam and then create 2 sides for each wing following this pattern, and then putting the 2 sides together. And then since I already glued the screws to this, I'm just going to cut the end of this off and glue it on the inside of the wing. So that way it still can attach to the wig. So now I get to make like 120 feathers, so let's do this. Woo! And so I got to work tracing out all the feathers, being sure to keep as much detail on the side splits as much as possible because I was going to end up cutting those out in the end. In the long run, this doesn't really matter because feathers are organic things and everyone is different, so the notches are not going to all be the same. Once I had them all traced out, I went ahead and cut them out with my scissors. These were all traced on to 3mm EVA foam, by the way. If I were to do these all over again, I would definitely try to go for a 2mm high density EVA foam because because while I really liked how sturdy the 3mm was, the thickness caused a lot of problems later on. I then followed all the guidelines for the little notches and then went in with my box cutter to score the foam to make the feather texture. A really cool thing about EVA foam is if you scratch or cut into the foam fairly lightly, just enough to get a little groove, and then hit it with your heat gun, the foam will start to contract with the heat and cause those cuts to open further. This is a really cool effect if you want to add any like engraving to your cosplay, but also if you want to do natural textures like I am with these feathers, it also works amazingly well. I ended up waiting until the wings were fully constructed to do a passover with my heat gun just so I could seal it all at once and I didn't have to do every single individual feather. I followed my diagram, making the bottom row of feathers and the top row of feathers separately, and then gluing the top row on top of the bottom. And then before I sandwiched the two together, I added a wire frame to stabilize it. And to make sure that the front and back of the wings matched up perfectly, I went ahead and constructed that bottom layer directly onto the back of this other side that I had already created. I did the top layer in a similar fashion, except I was gluing a couple together separately from the actual base and then gluing those little chunks onto the base itself. And since I added the wire in them, it made them slightly posable. Lastly, to finish up the construction of these wings, I wanted to cover up the big opening on the top, so I just laid a couple larger feathers on top. To finish off the head wings, I did a couple layers of plastic dip as primer before hitting it with this perfectly matched blue spray paint, and then I did a dry brush of a lighter blue to bring out those feather details. Moving on to the part of the cosplay that I was probably the most nervous to do because I had no idea where to start were the bird feet. I started out by taking the base shoe that I knew I'd be wearing under this costume and tracing out the toe of it so that I could extend it for the bird talons. I freehanded the toes, but I really did my best to make sure that both feet matched. Once I was happy with the shape, I went ahead and cut this out with a pair of scissors. I should probably mention that I am using 3-inch upholstery foam here, which is really hard to cut out with scissors, and I was told to use a box cutter, but that was honestly more challenging. I have seen a lot of fursuiters use a electric knife, and I've heard those work really well. So if you have one of those or can afford one, I suggest getting one of those. Once I had the toe base figured out and hollowed out, I just took scraps of foam and glued it until I had a shape that I liked. There was literally no rhyme or reason to this. I just puzzle pieced it and chopped chunks off of foam until it worked. I also learned through watching furry tutorials that using hot glue for this foam is the best way to go. I also went in and trimmed it to round out the toes and the side of the feet, and it didn't come out super clean, but this was going to be covered in fabric anyway. Now, once I had the base of the feet, I wanted to hop into actually sewing. I had not done any sewing at this point in time, and so as of this point, what you see from what I have made is exactly what I have made. There are no clothes in sight. So for the top and the legs with the feet, I decided to go with a tried and true duct tape and saran wrap pattern. And then for the bottoms, I used a pair of swimsuit bottoms that I already owned that tied on the side so that I can lay them flat and cut out the bottoms. In the long run, the bottoms ended up being a little bit too big just because I used scuba material for all of this, and scuba material is notoriously thick. So it kind of laid a little funky, but it worked. And it would work if you were doing something similar without such a thick material. Once I had my duct tape patterns, I was able to cut out all the individual pieces and start sewing them together. I really wanted to achieve that cartoonish bust that Zephrymon has, so for this I ended up making 2 Warbler cups. I actually learned this trick from Alice and Tabitha for her Mystique costume, so I will have that linked below. I did the same duct tape pattern for the legs, which I did indeed forget to film, but this was just comprised of a bunch of different strips, both horizontal and vertical, that I had to sew together. The con crunch was really getting to me, but I also forgot to film that the kneecaps were also made out of Warbler. Once I had the whole foot sewn to the leg piece, I was then able to hot glue the fabric to the foam foot. Because the scuba is so thick, it covered up any of the lumpiness that the foam had underneath. I also went ahead and attached a strap under the bottom of my foot just to help keep the bird foot in place. And to finish these bad boys off, I made these cute little toenails, toe coverings, and I hot glued those on top as well. I have since learned to not rely on hot glue so much, but with this, it worked perfectly fine, and I was really in a time crunch at this point. Now it is time to speed run some shoulder armor. I started out by taking some scrap pieces of newspaper and crunching it over my shoulder before covering that in duct tape so it could hold its shape. From there, I was able to trace out the shape I want, just like all the other duct tape patterns, before cutting that out and transferring that over onto some 3mm EVA foam. I glued the two halves of my foam together before covering that with Worbla using the wrap method. This is the exact same thing that I did when I was making the straps for the scarf. I'm simply just using Worbla instead. I am also so sorry that this clip is not in frame at all whatsoever. With thermoplastics, I like to prime them with the automotive primer, a sandable one, so that I can get them as smooth as possible. Once I had that, I was able to hit them with silver spray paint, and I did the same weathering treatment I did for the bolts on the scarf. And the last piece of this costume was the wig, which was this beautiful blue wig. I ended up buying two so that I can sew additional wefts into one. I did a light crimping on the layers underneath, closest to the crown, to give it a little bit more shape. And then I went to town cutting the bangs into that nice V shape that Zephrymon has, as well as cropping the bob a lot shorter and making sure to leave the ducktail in the back. I gave it a good hit of hairspray to make sure that everything stayed in place, and then with that, my Zephyrmon costume was done. And there you have it. That is my Zephyrmon cosplay. Thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of this video. It was definitely a long one. This costume was made back in the spring of 2024, so this footage is insanely old, but I still wanted to bring it out to you because I did film the whole process. So if it was entertaining or helpful for anybody, that is honestly my whole goal. With this being 2 years old, it is really hard for me to remember exactly how I was feeling or what I thought about the final product when I finished it. But looking back, I do remember that the sewing wasn't the best just because towards the end I was con crunching. I actually ended up finishing sewing this costume in the hotel room the night before I wore it. It was mostly small stuff, hand sewing, but still, I was still working on it the night before. I ended up almost pulling an all-nighter just to finish it the day before I left for con. So a lot of things were rushed, like the gloves, which are not even pictured here because I just did not have time to film it. And again, some of the sewing was rushed. And that's on me for waiting last minute to try and finish this costume. It should be said that con crunching is really not healthy for you. So if you have a deadline coming up and the costume is nowhere near being done, don't feel like you need to finish it for the sake of having it debuted at a specific con. You can literally push it to a different date and wear something old. No one will care. Trust me, I have taken years to learn this lesson and I still do not know it fully or follow it, sadly. Beyond that, this costume is actually really uncomfortable to wear. For the most part, it's comfortable. It is really just the combination of the face mask, the wings, and not being able to use my hands that make it super uncomfortable. If I were to take away one of the three, for some reason it balances out, but with all three together, especially in hot weather, it is a no-go. But she is really cool to wear, and the people who love Digimon Frontier just as much as I do, who recognize her, we have the best conversations, and that means so much more to me than the pain that I'm enduring while I'm in this costume. Again, thank you so much for watching and making it this far. If you did make it this far, please leave a bird emoji. I see people do these all the time where they ask for an emoji down in the comments, and I think it would be super fun. Also, let me know how you feel about Digimon. We can talk about the Digimon versus Pokemon debate. I love them both, so I'd be willing to talk about it. Just keep it kind and cordial down below. I do have a couple vlogs coming out after this, and then I will be posting my Storm build. I made a second Storm cosplay. If you're interested in watching the first one, I will have it tagged up here. Feel free to watch it after this video. And as always, I will ask you once again to hit that subscribe button. I would love to have you come and join me on this cosplay adventure. And with that being said, I'm gonna stop yapping and get to editing so I can get this video out to you guys. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye!